Microphone's on. Okay. That's all right. Is it working? Okay. The light's just not going on. That's fine. All right. Well, it's 5:30, so we can get started. This is the December 18, 2006 meeting of the Ventura County Air Pollution Control District Hearing Board. We'll call to order and ask the clerk to call the roll.
Mr. Gasparino?
Here.
Mr. Herlock?
Here.
Mr. Shackman?
I'm the medical member, so I'm Dr. Shackman, and I am here.
Mr. Stubblefield?
Here.
And Sarah Niceman?
Here. We have one petition on the calendar this evening, so if I could ask the persons who are going to be testifying tonight to rise so that the clerk can give you your oath.
You and each of you do solemnly swear that the testimony you are about to give in the matters now pending before the board will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Before us tonight is petition number 789, a petition of the City of Thousand Oaks concerning the Hill Canyon wastewater treatment plant for a regular variance from APCD Rule 29C. The petitioner is asked to present their case.
Thank you very much. My name is Chuck Rogers, and to my left is Santos Marquez, the environmental supervisor of the facility. I'm the superintendent of the Hill Canyon wastewater treatment plant, an advanced tertiary wastewater treatment plant located in Thousand Oaks, California. I'm sorry. You're welcome. Capacity of 14 million gallons a day. Currently, we treat about 11 million gallons a day there. We have an APCD permit for a variety of different activities, and today we're before you asking a variance because essentially we've created more gas than what we had anticipated through our anaerobic digester process. Your staff has been very helpful in helping us through this particular process. As the information shows here, we're also right now in the process of finishing up a cogeneration facility there, essentially creating 500 kilowatts of energy a day, using the majority of that gas that has been created. I anticipate, even though we asked until April to have the variance to, I anticipate that this is going to come online sometime in mid-January, at which time this issue of gas being burned in our flare in large part will just simply go away.
I do. First, I wish to clarify the location. It says on page 2 of the draft order that you're located at 9600 Santa Rosa Road, Camarillo, California. You just said you're in Thousand Oaks. What is the correct city of your facility?
Our facility is in Thousand Oaks. The reason why it has Camarillo is our mailbox is in Camarillo out on Santa Rosa Road, and so we've had to explain that a couple million times, but that's where our mailbox is at, and that's why our mailing address is 9600 Santa Rosa Road, Camarillo.
Facility is at, where's the facility?
If you were to take, if you could imagine go on Santa Rosa Road, it's in Thousand Oaks. You would take a right on Hill Canyon Road and proceed approximately 2 miles back into the city. It's a combination of the land that around there is either city-owned or it's part of our open space. It's definitely City of Thousand Oaks, though.
Thank you. My next question has to do with what it is that you are anaerobically decomposing in this facility.
It's the technical word that we're using these days is biosolids, but it's that organic solid matter that comes into the wastewater treatment plant that's separated from the wastewater stream. Essentially, if you think about a wastewater treatment plant, everybody's flushing their toilets. It comes in and has the consistency of chocolate, essentially. By the time it leaves our plant, we've separated the solids out of that. We put them in these anaerobic digesters. And we do that for a number of reasons. One is it helps stabilize the organic matter that's in there. We're really in the business of tricking bacteria to do all kinds of things in the wastewater treatment plant. So once it's impounded in there, it's put in an anaerobic environment, and the idea is to reduce as much of the physical material as we can. A byproduct of that is the creation of methane gas. which we're using to burn off. So that's any solid material that comes in the treatment plant, essentially.
Our information says you had a complaint registered in 1997. Could you talk about that incident?
I don't, honestly, Doctor, I don't know what one that would be. I wasn't working there in 97. I've only been there 8 years, so I'm not exactly sure what that odor complaint would be. It's not unusual to have odor complaints for wastewater treatment plants. We try awfully hard not to have them, but I don't know exactly, Doctor, which one that was.
We'll ask the district a little later on then.
Okay.
It's mentioned that you have very little flexibility in dealing with the current problem because if you were to stop flaring, you would be releasing odors, and this might be a nuisance and it might be a health hazard.
Mm-hmm.
Could you characterize the substances that are given off if you do stop flaring?
Well, essentially, the main component of that is methane, and there's some carbon dioxide. And typically, I believe, I don't want to speak for the APCD here, methane is the number one concern that they have in terms of potential releases that we could have. And it's widely, felt that that's one of the greenhouse gases of most concern. We certainly have more air experts over here than what I would be, but we essentially know that there are a couple things that we shouldn't be doing. One is creating more gas or any violation of our permit. The other one would be any release of methane from our tanks. They're essentially closed vessels that are meant to contain and then burn that methane through the flare.
Do you release sulfur compounds?
Relatively few. There is some hydrogen sulfide in the gas itself. I'm sure there are some sulfur compounds that are gone up the stack on this. I couldn't quantify how much that is, though.
Well, hydrogen sulfide is a hazardous substance to be released. Could you talk about the stream of hydrogen sulfide in the plant?
Well, I can talk about the amount of hydrogen sulfide that's in the gas that's then flared. I can't really talk about, with any great authority, what happens after that particular point. But there is some hydrogen sulfide that's generated in the anaerobic process of things breaking down. And I've got the numbers here in front of me. Our limit's 300 parts per million that we can have in that gas before it's flared. Currently, we hover around 150 usually as an average of that. But the final outcome of it after it's flared, I couldn't speak with any authority on what that is. It has not been an issue with us, though.
Does the efficiency of the flare vary from time to time?
I'm sure it does, and one thing I'm pretty pleased about is the fact that the engines will that when we install them, that we feel like there's going to be less overall pollution, and as a result of it, it's certainly better than the flare for taking care of that waste stream. It's wasteful to flare methane gas at a wastewater treatment plant.
That's all I have right now. Thanks.
Any other questions of the petitioners? I have a couple.
Sure.
You were just talking about the hydrogen sulfide, that you can't speak to how much is left over after the flaring. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes.
Is there, gentleman sitting to your left, you introduced him as the technical manager of the plant, I think?
My responsibilities in the past, besides the laboratory, has also been to kind of overlook these permits, to do my best to make sure that we're not in violation of them.
Can you answer that question?
To be honest with you, I'm, as far as technical expertise with that topic, I wouldn't be able to answer with any authority with regards to what we'd be releasing.
At one point in the paperwork that we received from staff, it talked about the potential for getting rid of the methane by alternative methods. What alternative methods are there? I mean, other than flaring, what else could be done with the gas?
The only other thing that I thought that could potentially be done, and I really didn't think it was a good idea, but it's one of those things, if you have enough money, you can do whatever you want to, is you literally could probably pay somebody to come there, pull it off the line, and find someplace else to flare it. I don't know where to begin doing that, but like other things, I'm sure if you spend enough money, you could do it. It's not a facility that I would recommend anybody doing that. I think there are all kinds of safety issues involved with doing something like that, but that's the only alternative I know of.
The staff report also indicated there were some questions about if, instead of flaring it off, you could lower the methane gas production by lowering digester temperatures. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
All right. What happens if we do that?
Potentially, a number of very negative things can happen. We try to maintain these digesters in what's considered a mesophilic range, which is very similar to the temperature of the human body, between 96 and 99 degrees, and we try not to vary this very much. If you do this, you can have what's called the souring of the digester, and we have had problems with our digesters. It kind of could be very finicky type of processes, and for over a year we had what was called a foaming of the digester, in which it essentially was upset episodically, would blow out the top. That's the foam, that's the material, not the gas, not gas, but just simple solid material that we had to impound and treat again, and not only got expensive, but it had potential to upset the rest of our treatment process. So you can slow the process down, but the negative of that is that sort of thing. Also, if the material is not digested properly in the digesters, it can come out having a terrible smell about it. Generally it's got a kind of an earthy smell about it, non-offensive, but if it becomes soured like that, it's not good. It's a terrible smell, actually.
So one of the findings we were discussing making tonight was that there was no viable alternative for gas disposal, and that releasing gas is not an option. From what I'm hearing, there are options, but they are not positive ones.
I don't think they're good options.
All right. We may have some more questions for you later, but why don't we hear from staff on this? If there's no further questions of the board? Oh, I'm sorry.
Going back to Dr. Shackman's original question, just for the record, can we get the location of the plant? Does it have a street address or some other?
I gave it to you. It was 9600 Santa Rosa Road. It's the only address that I have for the facility.
That's a hang
But there is no other address per se, no other formal address for the facility.
The equipment, do you have a copy of the draft order?
Yes, sir.
Tell me about these two pieces of equipment, just very generally.
Which ones would you be?
The ones that are permitted, the flare and the boiler.
Okay, the flare essentially is just that. It takes the material, the methane gas that comes out of anaerobic digester, burns it. It's about 35 feet tall, been permitted since day one by the APCD. Very crude, but it burns it at a fairly high temperature. The boiler is only used when we need to keep the digesters up to temperature during winter weather or some odd reason. Normally during the warmer months that we experience here, we don't ever turn the boiler on. It only comes on, episodically there.
So your primary means of getting rid of the methane is the flare only at this point?
Yes, sir.
And the boiler is a source of heat to maintain the temperature of the
Actually,
digester?
I take that back. I want to clarify that the boiler runs quite a bit of the time, but it runs just on the methane gas. Only rarely does it run on natural gas. I just wanted to clarify that. I thought you were asking something different, and I didn't respond correctly to that. Boiler runs, throughout the year. Obviously, during the winter months, it runs more frequently, so in order to keep the temperature up in the digesters.
So the methane gas is not adequate to run the boiler?
In some cases, you have to have natural gas supplement.
This permit is one of the older ones in the district. Have there been changes since the original initiation of since the facility got this permit?
I can't speak to the original permit. I can tell you as part of our APCD permit, we're required every 2 years to test the boiler and go through the normal permit conditions on it. And I think staff can attest, things have generally been, very good as far as our compliance with all that.
Okay, in the draft order, you talk a lot about efficiency and increasing efficiency. Is it really, I mean, well, the subject is the methane that you're trying to get rid of. Is there more methane because it's more efficient or because you're putting more through it?
No, we haven't seen a dramatic increase in the flow of plants. One of the things that's happened in wastewater treatment plants over the last 20 years is you're getting less water in and you're getting more solids in because people are using less water in everything that they do. I don't think there's been a huge population increase in Thousand Oaks. We have done a better job of operating the facility, and the pumping that we do to these digesters, we have improved that. And like I said, we struggled for a goodly portion of a year, getting the digesters operating, to where we'd like them to operate. And, right now, everything's going well as far as everything at the facility.
Does your facility handle all of the wastewater from Thousand Oaks?
Actually, there's a portion of it that goes over to Las Virgenes, an almost identical wastewater treatment plant over in Malibu. There's a natural geographic divide there in which a portion of Thousand Oaks goes over to that side.
So what comes in and what comes out of your plant in terms of wastewater? Or
11 million gallons a day right now. 14 million gallon a day capacity. Our flow average for this year is 11 million gallons a day.
And what is your product stream, I'll call it, for want of a better word? What comes out of the plant?
It's in the form of reclaimed water, which is picked up and sold to the Camarosa and the Cagas water districts, and it's reclaimed for agricultural usage and other irrigation throughout the area. The biosolids product that we're talking about, the digester, is about 14,000 tons a year. Gets shipped up to Kern County where it's composted up there. Those are our two products.
Okay. In the draft order, it talks about your new cogeneration engines that are not really the subject of this hearing, except that when they come online, they're going to improve the situation. But I was wondering why the words here say the proposed cogeneration engines may allow the existing boiler and flare to be converted to standby. Can you tell me why that's an uncertainty?
Because nothing works 24/7, and engines, like anything else, they go down periodically. They either go down for maintenance, they're just like anything else, they need to be taken down. So there's no certainty that in our facility that anything operates 24 hours a day. That's why we have so much redundancy in our facility.
And in my mind, that would still put the flare and the boiler, possibly at least the flare, on a standby. I'm not understanding. Standby to me means you use them in just the situations you're talking about. Mm-hmm. But this wording would suggest that maybe the cogeneration system is not going to consume all the methane that you make. Is that?
The trouble is this: is that in any situation like this where you're creating gas, it's hard to create it in a linear fashion in a perfect circle in terms of what that is. So your gas production can be affected by any number of things, and it kind of goes up and down during the day. So the flare may come on for brief periods of time. The engines may be able to handle that perfectly. I don't know for sure. We're creating enough gas right now for 500 kW, but there are times during that day, and the engines will ramp down for that. But there may be times during the day in which, as we feed the digester and we understand our operation better, the flare may kick on because it may exceed what the 500 kW is being created by the engines. So there is that possibility. It's almost impossible to completely modify that so that it works perfectly all the time, but we're trying our best to do that.
Okay. Do you know anything about what I see that there was a period of 6 months from your application for authority to construct to that authority being granted. Mm-hmm. Do you know anything about that time period? It seems long to me. Do you? If we can ask the district if they know, but as far as your facility?
As it is now, I can explain to you this. It's a third party that we're in business with here. It's U.S. Energy is the name of the company that's coming in, installing the generators on our site and operating them. The permit's in their name. We simply buy the electricity from them. We have a very similar project along with we have a solar array going on our facility, the 20th biggest one in the United States. Same type of business arrangement where a company comes in, installs it, and we'll be operating, we'll be buying the electricity from them.
So your facility owns the equipment, but
No, we don't own the equipment of the cogeneration system.
what about the boiler and the flare?
We own that.
Okay, so
Yeah, we'll continue to maintain that.
I was a little bothered by the fact that you had been in violation effectively for several months, or several of the months between January and August before the district's inspection pointed that out. Isn't there somebody on your staff whose responsibility it is to have known or noticed that?
That's my total responsibility, and I apologize to that. If I had been watching this closely, we wouldn't be here today. Certainly, the APCD staff has been very straightforward. I understood that. We simply weren't watching those numbers closely enough, and that's my responsibility.
Does your facility fall into the category of a sewage treatment works?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I presume that on the draft order on page 5, there's some tables down on the bottom. I'm guessing that those were generated by the district and not by, is that correct? Would you prefer that we ask the district about those numbers?
That'd be fine.
Any further questions?
Any further questions from the board for the petitioner?
I have one question. How many digesters do you have?
3 of them.
And they're operating, all of them at one time?
Yes, sir.
So you don't have a backup in case one has to be torn down, cleaned out, or
We can
for
operate.
emergency?
We can operate with one of them down, and we've done that in the past.
So there is capacity.
Yes, sir.
So you can also shift the amount of methane generated from one digester to another.
Theoretically, yes, sir.
Thank you.
Anything further from the board for the petitioners? In that case, I would ask the district to give us their comments.
There were several questions that came up, I guess directed towards the district. The most recent one, Mr. Herlock asked about 6 months to issue the authority to construct. I'm not quite sure what the permit process was, but in many cases that might be the appropriate time frame to figure out what type of equipment's being installed, if the application's complete or not, and what level of completeness the application is. There may have had to been some discussions about control technology for the engines, things like that. And then there's just the administrative time for us to send a bill out and get the fees back. So 6 months isn't out of the ordinary.
Thank you.
There was a question about the location, and I would propose that maybe on the second page of the draft order under item 1 that we maybe clarify that the facility is located in the city of Thousand Oaks, but its mailing address is Camarillo, just so we're up front about that, so everybody's clear about what that was. Question, I think Dr. Shackman raised a question about hydrogen sulfide in the flare stack and the boiler. What would be occurring in the process is that the methane gas that has hydrogen sulfide in it, and I think I heard maybe about 100 parts per million,
150.
which is quite odorous, very odorous gas, is sent to the flare, and the combustion in the flare converts that hydrogen sulfide to sulfur dioxide. So if you have complete combustion, then you're going to convert it all to sulfur dioxide and take care of that odor problem. And that's a fairly typical operation for wastewater treatment plants, and a lot of times out in the oil fields where they have hydrogen sulfide in their gas. There was a question about the emissions on, I think, Mr. Herlock, on page 5.
Yes, I'm just not quite understanding the entries in the second table on page 5.
Okay. What we've tried to do was to compare for the 5 pollutants that are listed on their permit, the amount of emissions that would occur that were permitted to occur legally by their permit, and those are in the center column called permitted tons per variance. The right column, we're trying to show what the excess emissions would be if this variance is granted. So those would be during the approximate 4 months of the variance period.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions that
Please.
Mr. Stubblefield?
Yeah, I had a couple of, these are just house cleaning questions.
Sure.
Also, it's that paragraph on page 5, the big paragraph right above the smaller of the two tables. It said between January 2006 and August 2006, the annual gas volumes increased by 3 billion BTUs per rolling 12-month period. In addition, the permit limit was exceeded for 6 months during January and August. You mean January to August, right? Right there? 2006 for 6 months during January to August?
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
We meant to say 3.
Okay. The other, then you said, therefore, the district estimates that the annual volumes could increase an additional 3 billion BTUs between August 2006 and April 2007. But those two periods are not equal. The first one's 8 months and the second one's 9 months. Did you mean between September 2006 and April 2007? Since you've already accounted for August in the 6 months that you monitored the excess BTUs, it's a little, if you meant to start the countdown from the beginning of August, that's a 9-month period, and it would be more than 3 billion BTUs. It would be at least 3 billion BTUs based on the 6-month estimate of 3 billion excess BTUs. You follow me?
Yeah, we were trying to take a look at and we didn't plot the numbers on a graph or anything, but we were trying to estimate the increase in gas production historically, and then trying to estimate what it was going to be between now and the end of April, when the variance would be over. Looking at those numbers, we estimated that it was going to go up about between now and April, that it would go up about another 3 billion BTUs. Okay. So Chris is correcting me now here.
I guess my point is that August is being counted twice in your inventory. It's the ending month and the beginning month.
Yeah.
So perhaps you could just change that to September 2006.
Yeah, I think that might be better.
If you're going to guesstimate 3 billion BTUs.
Right.
For another 6 months. That's all I have.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes.
I have a couple questions. I'm a little confused on this one, and maybe it's the wrong time of year for me to concentrate. I don't know. But I'm reading this and trying to figure out exactly what the impacts are going to be from the additional flaring. And while a number of questions have clarified that, I still don't understand quite what burning off those additional BTUs will do to the environment. Are we talking about, ROCs, particulate matters, I'm looking at the things that are actually in their permits. How close is this facility to residences, which I couldn't see in here, and maybe that's my fault, but is there anyone who has complained about the operation of the plant since 1997? These kind of questions, I'd like, if you have answers.
Okay. We had one complaint in our records that was from March of 1997, and it was actually a complaint letter that was sent to Supervisor Kathy Long's office regarding odors from the Hill Canyon wastewater treatment plant. The complainant is located in the Lynn Ranch area of Thousand Oaks. Evidently, we weren't able to find any, we weren't able to document the odor. So this is all that we've had registered as far as complaints regarding the plant. It is located up in the hills, up kind of up at the top of the Caneo Grade area?
No,
Or, no?
no, it's actually in a canyon.
Okay. But it is located away from residences. I think the city's petition indicated that the nearest residence was about 3/10 of a mile. The nearest school was, I've got it here. Nearest school was about 1.25 miles. Nearest residence was about 3/10 of a mile. So what we were trying to show in this table on page 5, though, is that during the variance period, we don't expect there to be a significant increase in emissions from the facility. There are the criteria pollutant emissions that we're kind of all familiar with. We don't see that there would be any toxic emissions from the facility. And shouldn't the excess emissions or the excess emissions caused by the flaring of this extra gas shouldn't create a nuisance problem or a health problem.
Is there any way to reduce emissions while the variance period is in effect? Is there anything we can do? Because I'm hearing from the petitioner that there's not a whole lot that can be done.
That's our understanding. The options that are available are probably going to generate either more problems and headaches and potential for emissions, or shutting down the facility is not an option. Readjusting the temperatures and things like that tends to generate more emissions. So it seems as if that at this point there's really no alternatives for what they can do to mitigate the emissions.
Does anyone else on the board have any questions for the district? In that case, it is time for public comment. If anyone has any comment at this time, please come forward. You can state your name for the record.
Dave Hennerman. I'm just recalling reading, I don't know, someplace, maybe Time Magazine. I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, methane is a problem. Is that right? Yes, methane is a problem in the atmosphere. Is that what I'm getting out of this? Am I correct?
Methane is a
So far.
substance that is controlled by the APCD. Yes, it is a criteria pollutant, I believe is the correct phrase for it.
And I think that's recognized in China. I think that's where I saw the article maybe a few months ago. And it was in connection with hog production, and they had, much like the Europeans before them, where they put together people where there's a byproduct and then somebody buys this. But they had found a way to capture the methane. Somebody was buying the methane, and this gentleman said he doesn't know what could be done with the methane. But in China, they've apparently, at least under some certain... Are you familiar with what's being done in China with the hog farms?
I am familiar with a lot of technologies for capturing methane from hogs and other animals that have taken place all across the planet.
But it doesn't have anything to do with what you're doing, or there's no
So we've already
application?
captured it. We're just burning it right now.
So that was just my question, has the company explored the idea of someone in the United States, say, who might want your methane and might want to capture it?
Well, I think that what we're here for today is a short-term variance in order to eventually, in 6 months, capture that methane and use it in a cogeneration facility. So essentially what we're doing tonight is trying to determine whether or not that excess methane can be handled by the district and by the district's rules for this short term, the 6-month period, in order to allow the cogen to be established and start up and working. I'm seeing nods, so I'm assuming I'm reiterating this correctly.
Yes.
All right. Any other comments from the public? Then we'll close the public.
Madam Chair, could I have maybe just a couple questions for the petitioner,
Yes, sir,
if I
please.
could. Regarding the progress on the cogeneration facility, how far along is it, and are you still looking at completing or having it completed in the first quarter of 2007?
Yes, we are. Both engines are on site. They're not yet connected, but all the electrical has been run for it. The company is highly incentivized to start making electricity for us, and I believe in January that's exactly what we're going to be doing.
We have proposed in the draft order a final compliance date of April 30th, 2007. Is that reasonable? Is it too long, or?
I think it's very reasonable.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
A question about the violation. You're currently permitted for 45 billion BTUs per rolling 12 months. And are you currently exceeding that limit?
Yes, sir.
And will be over the next period of this variance?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Those are all that I had.
Thank you, Mr. Duval.
Yes, I have a couple questions. First of all, can you tell me the capacity of Las Virgenes wastewater treatment plant? Average daily flow?
I believe it's a little less than ours. I couldn't probably give you an accurate. I'm thinking in the range of 12 to 13 million gallons.
And is that a tertiary treatment plant?
That's almost identical. It's an advanced tertiary treatment plant. The definition of that would be something like advanced nutrient removal, where they're removing the nitrates from it, and then there's filtration following that.
Is yours considered tertiary or just basic secondary?
Ours are advanced tertiary.
Okay. You know what the volume, the tons of solids Las Virgenes produces?
I would imagine that they're very similar to ours. Plants tend to be. I would imagine they're in the 12 to 14,000 tons. Now, that's wet tons. What would be coming out of their belt press versus what would be coming out of ours, I think that's fairly much a range for that particular.
And the percent solid is 70%?
No, nowhere close.
30%?
I wish it was. It's more like 15%, in the 15 to 20% range.
And what do they do with their gas?
They had fuel cells for some time. I think they're flaring it. They had problems with their fuel cells, and actually I just haven't been a little bit knowledgeable about this. I think they're looking to install IC engines to get back in the cogeneration business. Although I'm not a spokesman for them, I'm certainly familiar with it because we keep in contact with them on a regular basis.
And that communication allows you to share technologies, problems, issues, solutions, et cetera?
Absolutely.
Okay, because I'm quite puzzled why the two plants don't operate the same way in terms of cogeneration.
They, actually, a little history there. I was the guy who suggested to them to go to a fuel cell many years ago, and I left my employment to go to the city of Thousand Oaks. They took that idea, and I think it was an idea that was a little ahead of its time. It didn't work very well for them, and so now I think they're coming back to that. But they're a very innovative group over there.
The earlier question I asked had to do with the number of digesters, and where I was going with was the storage of the generation of methane so that you can feed the excess over a 24-hour period. Can you do that, or can't you do that?
No. We don't have any storage. The only storage is in the annular space between the level of the solids in there and the dome. And unfortunately, the design of ours is there isn't a ton of space there to do that. And it's more a matter of the engineering that takes place inside the digester. It is a matter of personal choice to do it. We simply can't run the digester down to, say, a 3/4 level because of intense piping inside the digester, which doesn't allow us to do that, so that we can maintain a larger volume of gas on top of that. So our annular space in there is relatively small.
So all 3 digesters are at 80% or more capacity?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That's the amount of material in there. The capacity is a little bit of different issue. It can still handle more biosolids. For example, we have 11 million gallon a day flow. It can go up to 14 million gallons a day and handle that.
And are you I'm sorry, I missed at the beginning. Are you the treatment plant engineer or resident
I'm the
engineer?
superintendent.
Superintendent? Okay. And how many years have you worked there?
8 years.
8 years.
8 great years, too. It's a great place to work.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any further questions from the board? In that case, discussion, the public hearing is closed, and entertain some discussion among the board as to what we should do today.
I'm inclined to agree with the district's assessment. I think we should grant the variance. I think that they're going to have to go through a tough period here, and there's going to be some excess emissions, but it's also winter, so far better that they do it now than do it during smog season. Although they did do it during smog season, I'm a little troubled by the lengthy period between when they first identified the issue and between then and now, and they're now before us seeking a petitioning for a variance. However, I think it's for a good cause, and I'm comfortable with the district's recommendation that it's not going to be significant.
I would actually like to hear from Dr. Shackman as to any health impacts from this, because that is clearly your bailiwick.
We've heard the district tell us that they get complete combustion of the hydrogen sulfide at the top of the flare. If that's true, then we don't have to worry about hydrogen sulfide rolling down to ground level and killing people, which has happened in the county. The district tells us that they get complete combustion. As far as other toxic substances, they haven't told us of other toxic substances produced volatile organic acids of one kind or another produced, and of course a concern in their facility. So from the presentation made here, I'm not able to identify a threat to public health, and we've also been told that we don't have a nuisance.
Thank you. Any comments?
Yes. I don't know if I should say this or not, but as your engineering representative, I used to design wastewater treatment plants, so I'm very familiar with what you're talking about. So I don't think there are any other serious problems. I guess my concern is that when you're talking about January and the district allowing April 2007 seems like a very, very long time to show the fact that you can get those 2 generators, co-generating systems online quickly. So I think that's too generous, actually, April of 2007.
Would you have any suggestions for modifying the order to reflect a
Well, I
shorter
think
date?
60 days would be sufficient, but then I'm not familiar with all of the data and information on the wastewater treatment plant either. So I can only suggest and add that to maybe consideration for the district to look at.
Mr. Herlock, any comments?
Madam Chair, I might suggest somewhat in anticipation of our discussion on topic 2 tonight, that here on the board, we briefly go down the findings among ourselves to agree that we have the evidence in front of us. I think there's no question that, and the petitioner has been asked and has stated that they're in violation. They are a public facility, and shutting them down would create a unreasonable burden on the public. I'm not quite sure how to deal with finding number 3 with this. It's really the same kind of thing. It is a public service item. I think that your questioning in particular has uncovered the applicant's consideration of curtailing operations, and they've indicated that that's just not a possibility.
And the district has concurred.
District has concurred. With respect to reducing excess emissions, I think we've heard both from the petitioner and from the district that the maximum extent feasible is 0. that we have what we have.
Yes.
As far as monitoring the emission levels, that's asked for in the order, and so I don't think we need to dwell on that. We've heard about the nuisance, and as long as they continue to flare, I think we don't need to worry about that. I think we will continue to have a problem with item 8 because of the recent reclassification of particulate matter by the California Air Resources Board. So any increase in particulate matter, I think that's something that we're going to have to deal with. This district will probably have to deal with the state on that, in my opinion. And we just had a discussion that of the increments of progress, and I think they're reasonable, certainly generous. I think they're probably as expeditious as practicable, and especially considering the fact that the petitioner will be paying additional fees for any emissions beyond the point when they come into compliance.
Well, in regards to your comment on number 8, I think we have the obligation and the right to balance the particulate matter against the pathogens and odors that might be released. Or am I on the wrong track?
The issue is that the level, the toxic level for particulates has been established at 0, and so any increase in the particulates automatically is a health issue according to ARB. I don't know what our board can do about that.
Right.
Maybe we could reopen the discussion and ask Mr. Duvall if he has an opinion, but.
Well, we're going to keep bumping up against this one, so if we could address that. We bumped up against this the last hearing. We had to.
If I could maybe just clarify, the issue on particulates is with diesel particulate, combustion of diesel fuel, where the State Air Resources Board has classified diesel particulate matter as a toxic air contaminant.
Only diesel?
Only diesel.
Okay.
So in this case, we're dealing with a non-diesel combustion.
I stand corrected.
Okay. And then we could go back to the balancing idea of balancing the pathogens and odors versus the particulate matter increase. I think we're on solid ground there.
Yes, I agree.
I have some suggestions as modifications to our finding of fact for consideration of the board. On page 5 of the draft order, first paragraph, closing the business or taking your property, I believe that should just be stricken, because we're not talking about a business or taking property. We're talking about the second prong of that particular test, which is that it would impose an unreasonable burden upon an essential public service. So what I would suggest is striking the first paragraph, leaving the second paragraph intact without change. In the third paragraph, add, after closing the facility would leave the city without a facility to process wastewater, and add the phrase, and impose an unreasonable burden upon an essential public service. If we do that, we have made that second finding. And I think it's an appropriate finding rather than talking about business or property, but instead talk about public service. Mr. Stubblefield indicated a couple of changes in that fourth paragraph, changing "and" to the word "to" in the discussion during January to August of 2006, and then 2 lines later down, changing August to September so that we have equivalent months. On page 6 of the draft order, paragraph 4, second paragraph, I would like to modify that to read on the second to the last line, instead of "there is no viable alternative for gas disposal," there is no economically viable alternative for gas disposal, because clearly the testimony has been that there are options, but that those options are not economic at this time. I believe those are the only suggested changes I had. If anyone has any comments on them, I'd like to entertain that at this point.
Ms. Niswander, could you go over the first
Page,
comment on page 5?
page 5, first paragraph, strike it. Oh, this is paragraph 3.
Right.
There's 5 paragraphs on that page under paragraph 3. So the first paragraph would simply be stricken. Second paragraph remains as is. Third paragraph, end of the paragraph, change the period to a comma and add the phrase, "and impose an unreasonable burden upon an essential public service."
Okay. That was my clarification. Thank you.
Sorry, I was speaking rather quickly.
That's okay.
Any comments from the board? No?
I think they're great.
Okay, with those changes, would anyone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion that we adopt the order with the modifications just discussed.
Second.
Clerk, call the roll, please.
Aye.
Aye.
Mr. Stubblefield,
Aye.
Mr. Hurlock,
Aye.
Chair Niswander,
Aye. Okay, your petition has been granted with those modifications. I'm sure you'll get a final order in the mail very quickly.
All right. Thank you very much for your time tonight. I appreciate it.
We're going to move straight on to our next item for this evening, which is a discussion regarding the ARB's review of our variance program. They didn't give us a grade, but from my impression from the staff report, we didn't get an A. Mr. Duval.
I think I've reviewed a number of ARB audit reports on other district programs, and I think the review they gave our program here is much better than any other districts. And ARB provides these comments in light of trying to provide, better program, trying to dot the i's, cross the t's, trying to comply with state law. There's other programs throughout the state where they've written pretty scathing comments, not allowing the public the opportunity to provide comment, holding a hearing without hearing from the petitioner, things like that. So I think the comment that they made with regards to the findings is really a pretty minor comment.
The thing that causes me the most concern is that we're not, as a background matter, this is started in May through July of '04, and they didn't release their report for 2 years?
Yeah.
So I guess we'd have to look back very carefully to figure out if we're doing things the same today as we were doing in May through July of '04.
Yeah, and I think actually they looked at the record from 2002, 2003. So the time period and the hearings and the orders that they were looking at go back to the 2002, 2003 time period.
Mr. Duval, is that the time when we were doing Halico hearings almost all the time?
Okay, yeah. I'm not sure.
I wonder to what
Hey.
extent the Halico hearings were the subject of their audit.
They, in the comments that they provided in, and even in the initial draft of the comments that we talked with them about, there was no mention of Halico during the hearing. But during that Halico time, during the Halico hearings, as you put it, wasn't really for a variance hearing. They were petitioning the terms of a permit that we gave them. They were petitioning to change those terms or overturn that permit, and that wasn't a variance hearing. Several of the hearings that they did make comment on, it was during the time that we had a series of variances for Reliant Energy during the energy crisis, and they had to exceed their throughput in their peaking turbine unit. I think one of the comments was related to Robbins Autotop. Robbins had a several period of variances for their adhesives. So that was the time frame that they were looking at. I think Halico might have been sometime earlier than that.
I have other questions. Is it timely now? Or should
Oh,
I wait?
please, unless you have any further comments, Mr. Duval, we'll turn it over to the board to ask you
Sure.
questions.
And I do have questions for you. What I understand of the ARB recommendation 1, that the hearing board is not independently making findings, suggests that the hearing board is not independent of your office. And I think that is absolutely incorrect. I think we properly function in the quasi-judicial role set up for a hearing board, and we hear two parties, a petitioner and the district. I've been on this board a ridiculously long time, so I can go back to when that wasn't necessarily quite the way it is today. And as a result of the way things were 20 years ago, we obtained our own counsel. And first Dan Murphy and now our current counsel are from the county counsel's office and are expected to have and do have the same expertise as anyone who's served as your counsel. I think we're in a very strong position to independently perform our duties and make findings. So when they go on to then say that we rely on a draft order written by the district, there's a clear implication that we are simply following orders written for us by the district. It's not true. We are appreciative of the extensive work done by the district and all the expertise of the district personnel, but we are also carefully reviewing that material in order to make the necessary findings. Now, going back even further, before I came on the board, but I was told by people who were on the board that there was a time when the board had to prepare all of their documents themselves, and that this became an unreasonable burden on board members and particularly on the legal member of the board, and that in some manner it was reviewed by a judge of the Superior Court here in Ventura County, and it was determined that that was not a necessary manner in which the board had to operate. So all in all, I think the ARB is incorrectly suggesting that our board is not independently performing its duties, and is incorrectly suggesting that the manner in which we're not is by relying upon the draft order written for us. I don't think I would have accepted the ARB's report if I were in your position as the district. I would have countered with the arguments that I've just given you. I have a lot of experience serving as an auditor for the state, as a surveyor of health plans, not of air pollution districts, but for the current Department of Managed Health Care, for the Department of Corporations, for the Department of Health Services over 20 years, and have done a great many of these surveys, as a special consultant for these agencies, and it's expected that there will be a response from the entity being surveyed and a meeting of the minds and modifications of initial impressions when further information is provided by the entity surveyed or when another interpretation of the facts is put forward. So I really am not comfortable with the district's acceptance of the ARB's statements implying a lack of independence of our board. So I'd like to hear more what the district has to say in defense of their accepting the ARB's position on point 1.
Well, I understand what you're saying, and I guess when I read this and prepared, our response, I didn't, might say, look at it as critically as you have, and maybe we should have. Well, I didn't read it as ARB saying that, you went along with us all the time on recommendations and the findings. That wasn't what I read into it.
Mr. Gasparino.
Yes, if I could, and this is still on my mind, and I have the notebook in front of me, ironically enough, but Council and I went to the training over a year ago by ARB, and actually during one of the breaks I asked the question about the district providing the variance before us instead of the board preparing the written variance, and I would have suspected this kind of feedback from ARB based upon that. Most of the districts and the folks that I talked to that were on advisory hearing boards, they prepare their information afterwards. And I think most of them that I talked to expressed jealousy that the district staff here did as much as they did. And so I think I agree with Dr. Shackman with regards to that. But on the other hand, ARB's pretty straight in their notebook here with respect to doing it ahead of time.
I didn't get that, interestingly enough. From the report from the ARB, I got the impression that while we relied on a draft written order in which the district identifies all the required findings, what they had a problem with is that during the hearing itself, we weren't independently making each one of those findings. Not so much that the draft order was in front of us, but that during the hearing it should be made very obvious that we are considering and making a decision on each one of the 6 findings, independent of the order, independent of anything else. Not so much that we were being spoon-fed by the district, which is the impression that I get from Dr. Shackman, but rather that during the hearing itself, this has to come out, it has to be discussed, it has to be put before the public. That was the impression I got from what the ARB said, not that they were criticizing the district for presenting us with a draft order, because I appreciate that. As you said, some other people were jealous of how much the district did. Yes, I think it's extremely helpful to me to see what the orders are. We can always modify them. We have the right and the obligation to modify them if we find that those findings are not correct or don't match the evidence that's presented by the petitioner. But to have the draft in front of us, I find very helpful. More comments?
Yes, my impression is kind of a middle ground. I think I don't think I heard what Mr. Gasparino's heard from other districts as far as the people who run those training sessions are South Coast, and most of the people there are not South Coast and will never be. I think I'd like to see more districts like ours be involved in the training. But the point that the attorney, I can't remember her name for South Coast, kept say. Don't remember. But in any event, that that we were supposed to make the bridge between the evidence and the findings. And to do that, I think the ARB is listening to these audio tapes and not hearing us say these things, which is sort of what I did tonight during our discussion session. And I think that's a rather petty formality, if that's required for us to do that, rather than to follow some things that are self-evident. Maybe that's what we need to do. I think I agree with Dr. Shackman in the sense that most of us here can read this draft order, and from what we hear, make these findings without saying them out loud, just from what's presented. The fact that we don't bring them out in oral discussions during the hearing, I think, is what's bothering ARB, and we may not have, that may be what's required. I think it's kind of stilted formality. I'd rather not do it, but it's not that difficult for us to come up with a little procedure, whether the chair or whether one of us keeps a score sheet during the hearing, comparing what we hear with what's in the draft order. That would be that or something like that I tried to do tonight. It takes a little extra time, but.
Well, I think, if I may, that's, I think, what they want, or at least that's the impression that I get, that they want it to be a little bit more stilted so that the record reflects the finding of the 6 points. And as you say, it's not hard. We've been doing it already, or at least it appears to me that we have. It's just a matter of making sure that it's very, very clear on the record.
Looked at in that way, I see no problem with it. But there's more to look at. Look at the last phrase, verify the information in the draft written orders is true and correct. What do you think they mean by that?
We're looking at paragraph 1 of the ARB
Yeah, the
report.
first, we haven't gotten
Last
to 2 and
sentence.
3 yet.
Yeah. Well, I think when they say verify the information in the draft is true and correct, I think what they're implying is that there be some type of questioning of the petitioner to verify that they are in noncompliance and what are the levels of noncompliance. A lot of what you went through tonight, questioning the city about the alternatives and curtailment, things like that.
Okay, well, we are taking sworn testimony.
Yes.
What degree of additional activity beyond what you've sat through and participated in over these many years would you imagine they're expecting us to do to verify that the sworn testimony is true and correct?
I think there's times when the petitioner, even in the discussions, not all of the 6 findings are discussed or questioned of the petitioner. I think there may be an acceptance of some of the facts. Let's take as an example of the violation occurring or going to occur. And I know there's been times where there has been a discussion about trying to decide whether they really are in violation or not. But I think other times it hasn't occurred. And I think they want to be able, like Ms. Neiswender said, they want to be able to listen to the tape and understand that all of these facts came out to support the findings.
Okay, well, thank you for clarifying that.
Any other comments on the...
I was in on the Robbins, the 2 cases that you cited, and I think Dr. Shackman was. The rest of this board wasn't here. And
right.
In my view, having been on the board long enough now, not as long as Dr. Shackman certainly, I think that the current board constituency is probably more critical in its analysis of what's being given to it, both from the district as well as from the petitioners, than when I first got on the board. That's just
I think that's true. I think that's a valid comment.
And my second comment is that although, like Stephen Herlock said, we don't usually walk our way through the 6 findings, no one on the current board has been shy whatsoever when he or she has any difficulty making a finding. You know, if there's something thorny, I mean, the members of the board do bring it up and we do hash it out. Unfortunately, that might not have been the case back then. This is so long ago, it's almost, it's kind of difficult to use it in an instructional way. Perhaps if they actually had, if they had reviewed certain cases and they wished to critique them, if they handed them to us and said, well, this is where we had an issue with, it might be more instructional and useful, like at a workshop.
Right.
Rather than just saying, well, we reviewed 23 cases and this is what we found in general, but that's so vague and it's so general that it's hard to apply that in a specific manner. Like Steve said, I guess we could just walk our way through it every single time just for the audio record.
I would, that's kind of distasteful to me.
I think we have to.
Do we want to, do the board members want to do that? I would, if we decide to do that, I would recommend something like, you know, a score sheet that the chair keeps or one of us keeps by turn
Make sure we
or by
don't miss one of
appointment,
them.
rather than to do it formally like I did it in the discussion.
Well, there's a kind of a score sheet, if you will, attached to the staff report on this issue. And that's what I was looking at tonight when we were talking, and maybe we just use something very similar to this, the 6 findings for variance under Health and Safety Code 4235-2. Yeah, this is a relatively simple thing to follow. It may be something that if we keep a score sheet, I mean, there's even check marks, places to put a check mark next to it. I'm looking at this. No.
That was an attachment in the memo that I sent out.
Yeah. Hey, this is, if you look up, Stephen.
Oh, that was in this one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it does provide the 6 findings. They're laid out fairly cleanly, and, you know, the one where we discussed tonight, whether it was a taking or a public agency issue is stated in the alternative, everything seems to be here. And if we just go down through this during board discussion, I think we'll cover it. One other comment on the composition of the board. If they're looking at things that happened 5 years ago, they're looking at a different entity completely. Because in my experience, dealing with boards on a regular basis, every time you change out a member of the board, you create a new being. I mean, it's a completely different creature. It's a different entity because it's got a different personality. So, I know that sounds kind of odd, but boards have personalities. This one's feisty. And I've not seen anyone on this board shy about questioning petitioners or the district on things that are confusing or difficult. So, I appreciate the ARB's comments and the ARB's instruction. I personally, as chair, would go through this list every time from now on out. But otherwise, I don't see it so much as a criticism, but just direction. Mr. Gasparino.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I guess being the newest one on the board, I feel that I do my job as a representative of a quasi-judicial board here, and I think between the information that the district provides as well as the draft variance, those questions are answered for me, and I do my job, and I don't think there's a lot of benefit in spending the extra time going through a checklist and scoring things for each of the variances that are coming before us.
I agree with that, but I think that's why we got these comments. I think the ARB people sit there with a score sheet and listen to the audio tapes and check checks. And if they get through a hearing and they don't have all the checks, then they say we didn't make the findings. I think that's how we got this evaluation.
Mr. Ariano, you've been awfully quiet. As counsel to the board, do you have any comments on this?
I have a few. I received this about 4:30 today and talked to Jim Thonis, and he and I recalled an issue came up with this in '97, to which Dan Murphy replied, and I have copies of his reply to Leslie Krentz at CARB. And that, I think, will be helpful for each of you to read. Jeff, if you want to hand these out. And that should be sufficient for everyone here. Gary's got one. There's nothing you're legally required to do differently than what you're doing now. I have a couple practical suggestions to get around part of what they're saying if you want to. Certainly you can do what you've suggested, having the checklist. I think it would be helpful because of your rules on evidence and hearing procedures that when you have the initial people giving their testimony, you ask them the question, is everything in your petition or your report accurate? Is there anything you need to change? They're under oath at that point, they can affirm, and then you've got everything in the report being affirmed, and that covers all 6 elements always. And you've put the evidence in, and you've closed the analytical gap, and you're basically done at that point, because unless there's something that's erroneous that you discovered during the hearing, between the petition and the report, you have all the 6 elements and more covered. And that's something you haven't done, in my experience, in 1 year. You haven't particularly asked, is everything in the petition something you can swear to under oath or affirmation?
Without looking at a copy of the petition itself, is there something in there that has it under oath, or is it just signed?
No, it's just a regular signature. I checked.
Just a regular signature. So getting an affirmation from them at the hearing would certainly be helpful.
Right. And also from the district, because it's just a staff report.
Is it correct, or is true and correct?
Oh, it's once they're under oath, it's whatever you want, basically. It's just saying, is there anything inaccurate, or is it all correct? Do you stand by it? Any kind of common sense terminology to get them stand by it. It then becomes evidence under your criteria for oral evidence, and it's incorporated in. Is this letter, you'll see, if you get a chance to read it, shows it's all already incorporated in anyway. I mean, that's the evidence. They can't rely solely on the tapes. They have to rely on what you saw, read, and reviewed. It's been my firm experience in the last year that you're very critical of elements when you see a problem, and that you pay less attention to the ones that are obvious, for obvious reasons. They're clear-cut that there's a violation, for example, or something else. So I guess I have the view that this is dated without being there and experiencing it, and that you're actually covering these things very well. And I also would agree with Mr. Duvall that this isn't a very harsh analysis of you as compared to other.
They were so nice to his department.
Well, even from the conference I went to, there are many more egregious things going on in other districts. These are pretty nitpicky problems. And I think it makes their job easier that they can check off the checklist. And one way to force that on them is to make the petitioner and the staff stand by their written documents, and then they have to look at the written documents. If the evidence is in there, you're covered.
I want to ask about the third point. The ARB says district staff reports are missing information pertaining to possible adverse health effects. I don't understand how they could have reached that conclusion. The form that you use, your method of preparing the draft always has some mention of health effects, usually negative, that they're not going to be present. And if there's anything that may be present, it's questioned.
In the last several reports that we've given you, we've made an attempt to try and be more specific with regards to the diesel particulate issues, and I think there was a solvent emission or something. Where possible, we've tried to clarify the excess emissions, and sometimes that information is just so nebulous or hard to get to that we just aren't able to do it. But I think we've kind of fallen down on the health issues, other than will it create a nuisance, yes or no. But so we're making a more concerted effort to give you information on the health issues.
Well, since this is the area that I've focused on, I really can't understand the ARB's criticism in that area. I have been satisfied with the presentations the district has made, and I have certainly pursued all those issues that I thought needed to be pursued.
Yes, you have.
Anything further from the board on this issue?
A comment on item 2 on Keith's memo to us. I'm not understanding the last sentence. this would allow the hearing board to impose proper mitigation measures while the order is in effect. Not quite sure what they mean or what that would be and how we would do that. I mean, we basically grant or deny the variance. Do you understand what that sentence means?
I kind of took it to mean that it might help focus or might force the thinking to really look at, let's say, ways to reduce operation of an engine, a diesel engine. If you know that there's diesel particulate coming out that's a carcinogen, that you may focus your discussion on really how you can reduce the operation of that engine. And I think when we had the County of Ventura and City of Simi Valley, I mentioned in the staff report that diesel particulate was a carcinogen and that granting the variances could increase diesel particulate. And I think there was a lot of discussion about their concern and potential ways to reduce the operation of those engines, not just during the variance period, but after the variance too. And so I think that's what ARB meant by that comment about mitigation.
Madam Chairman?
Please.
I've had a chance now to read the July 18th, 1997 letter that Dan Murphy wrote. And Mr. Oriana, thank you very much for bringing it. I'm having a few synapses tickled, and maybe more of this will come to the front of the brain. But I like very much what Dan wrote on page 3. In the paragraph below the middle of the page, he talked about holding in Topanga, Supra, and health and safety code requirements, and he went on to say that I submit that a requirement for recitation and discussion of each finding by a hearing board is neither desirable nor legally required. And I think all of us are feeling that way, and I think Mr. Herlock said so explicitly. We want to spend our time here dealing with the matters that are important and not going through a long recitation of material just because someone at the ARB thinks that's a good way for all of us to spend our time. So is there any reason to think Dan Murphy's interpretation is no longer the correct interpretation?
Oh, absolutely not. And I also would like to concur with Mr. Duvall. The first thing that came to my mind was the board members' efforts in the county and the City of Simi Valley efforts because you had the information. And I interpret this last sentence to mean that during the hearing you'll have enough information to impose the mitigation effects in the future, not that you would be rehearing it later. I think they mean if you have the information up front, for example, on diesel, you can think about how can we curtail their operations better. And I think you're doing that. Again, it might be a problem with the dates of the reports they're looking at.
I would suggest that tonight we did what the ARB wanted us to do. Mr. Herlock's comments going down the list of the 6 findings in very summary fashion at the end of the discussion met what the ARB intended in its, or what I believe they intended in their memo to us. It only took a couple of minutes. And I don't think it's something that is so onerous that we need to avoid it. As flipping through the memo, that the Murphy memo, I don't think any of those cases are no longer valid. They're all still directly on point. But really what the ARB is looking for, and I hate to defend the ARB, I feel like I'm disloyal to this board by doing so, but I think what they're trying to do is make sure that these things end up bulletproof, that no one can challenge them, that they are legally sufficient. And I don't think it's going to take us that much time to do what they're asking us to do on a practical level. Because what Mr. Herlock did earlier in 2 minutes was all they're looking for. So let's see how it pans out in the course of hearings to come as we spend a few minutes going through those findings. I don't think it's going to be, after we get used to it, I really don't think it's going to be that much of a big deal. It's going to be something that's very natural, comes through the course of the hearing, takes a couple extra minutes, and we're done. But we will bulletproof those findings, we'll meet the Topanga criteria set forth in the Murphy memo, and we'll be fine. So,
Is
with
there
that-
not, is there not consideration for what council suggested, though, earlier?
I think that we can do it that way, or we can do it on the record in the fashion. Oh, one thing I did want to mention, Mr. Onayana suggested that we have the petitioner immediately upon taking the oath affirm that everything in that petition is true and correct. I think we should add that to every single hearing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what he's saying,
Yeah, no question. But that's not really what I was talking about. I was talking about the findings under the 6 individual criteria.
Well, my point on that is their petition requires them to go through those findings. So essentially, you've got evidence on all findings as soon as they say that.
Sure.
I mean, not saying it's accurate or not, but you've got evidence on it.
If we
Right.
don't accept it, we can question them on it.
Exactly. But,
Which we
again,
do.
That relieves us of the responsibility of maybe taking the 5 minutes to go through each of them. So I think that, anyway, that was what I heard as a recommendation, and I certainly would support that.
yeah, all right.
I mean, oftentimes it's self-evident that the petitioner has no other option with respect to one of those findings
Sure.
to all of us, and we don't ask them about it. It's not an issue.
Like, for example, tonight.
Yeah.
The first one, that the petitioner is or will be in violation of the section. And you said, well, they've already admitted it, so we don't have to go into that. Yeah. So, and we rarely do, because it appears to be self-evident from everything in front of us, so. All right.
Well, I think everything you've said gives me comfort with the situation, and these will be small modifications. It will not suck up a lot of time and dull our brains as we go through it. I'm wondering if there's any public press-type interest in this ARB survey. Have you encountered any sense of that?
In ARB's audit report?
That's right.
No, and I believe ARB put out a press release when they issued it.
And did they say anything about this board lacking the necessary independence?
No.
Because that's the one item that I would want to be as firmly as possible in disagreeing with the ARB on, if that's what they're trying to say. And if there were any local press interest in it, making clear that the hearing board does its job independently, that it is not a tool of the district, and it gives the petitioner a appropriate, fair hearing.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Stubblefield.
I have a question of the district that is related to just the way our proceedings and the paperwork specifically, not necessarily with respect to the ARB's review. I have wondered for a long time why we don't publish, excuse me, got a sore throat, why we don't publish the fines in the draft, in the agreement, the written agreement between the variance hearing board and the petitioner in the district. I mean, I know you don't know how much they're going to emit ahead of time, but you know how much you charge, right?
Well, there's...
It kind of
yeah.
disturbs me, because I think it ought to be on the record that they've said yes, and while we're in this, while we're operating under this variance, and while we have excessive emissions, we will pay this much per pound or per whatever unit of measurement the district uses to...
We can add that in. That wouldn't be a problem.
Does anybody else feel that way? I don't understand why it's secret.
I thought in prior cases, some of which I recall, we were concerned about going back and making sure that the organization, the petitioner, was being fined. And district, I think's comment was, in many cases, was that we're going to work with them on that, and we will certainly,
I
find them the
think
appropriate amount.
maybe a year ago or maybe longer.
I think there's two different topics that we're kind of bouncing back and forth here. One is we charge excess emission fees based on the excess emissions that are generated during the variance period. And that's one reason that we always ask the petitioner to tell us what the total volume of gas burned or gallons of fuel burned was. Or
Is that because you simply don't have the resources to do it yourself?
Well, they're the ones that keep the records. You know, they keep the records on how much fuel they're consuming during the variance period, so they turn that over to us at the end of the variance. And then we calculate the excess emissions. And we charge them a fee based on those excess emissions. But there are also times, and this is one, where we've issued a notice of violation because they did violate the rule for a period of time.
Without a variance?
Without a variance. And we don't, what you might say, settle up our notices of violation until they get the variance or until they get their permit completed. So it might be a period of time after this variance hearing that we really do make a settlement offer on the notice of violation for monetary.
You say you might make them.
Yeah, so, and a lot of it depends on the facts. In this case, we're going to be pursuing a monetary penalty for their notice of violation. There are times when that we issue a notice of violation, and because of the facts of the case, we decide a penalty isn't warranted. That's maybe less than 10% of the notices that we issue. But in most cases, in almost all cases, we'll seek a monetary penalty. And when a variance is involved, like in this case, it's going to happen after the variance is concluded, or at least the hearing is concluded.
And what happens to this money? Is it just becomes part of the district's operating budget?
Yeah.
And the fines, as I recall, are eventually published in the newsletter, Skylines? Or is it just?
I don't think I've ever seen them.
Well, we publish a gross monthly number for penalties.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
One of the things that we're kind of leaning towards is on our website publishing a list of notices of violation and penalties per notice of violation. So we're trying to get to the point where we can actually put a lot more data on our website regarding violations and permits and all that.
Because none of that data is secret. It's all public.
No, it's all public
record.
Yeah, it's
Right.
all public
just
record.
Sometimes you have to dig a little harder than others. With that, considering the lateness of the hour, I would suggest that we can wrap this up unless somebody has something else they'd like to add. Well, actually, we're not quite done yet. But we will move off this particular issue and go on to public comment if there is any. Seeing none. Any comments from the board before we adjourn? No. In that case, we'll declare the meeting adjourned.
Thank you all for your comments. Very informative and helpful.
Thank ARB for their comments.
I don't know.
When's our next hearing?
January 22nd? January 22nd.
22nd?
Yes.